I'm so sorry, babe. The quarterly audit is running late. I'm still at the office, buried in spreadsheets. Happy first anniversary. I'll make it up to you, I promise. His voice was smooth. Silk over gravel. It was the same voice that told me, I do, exactly 365 days ago. I stood perfectly still, the cool night air of the Sapphire Hotel gardens biting at my bare shoulders. My phone was pressed to my ear, but my eyes were fixed on a point 40 feet away, near the edge of the turquoise infinity pool. The moonlight caught the silver of his watch, the one I'd bought him for his promotion. He wasn't at the office. He wasn't buried in spreadsheets. He was leaning against a marble pillar, laughing, and tucked under his arm, wearing a dress I had helped her pick out just last week, was Sarah, my maid of honor. My sister, my best friend. It's okay, Mark, I whispered. My voice didn't even shake. That's what scared me the most. Work is important. Don't stress. I'm just going to have a quiet night in. You're the best, Elena, truly. I don't deserve you, he said. And then I watched him lean down. I watched his lips, the lips that had kissed my forehead before he left for work this morning, press firmly against Sarah's. She giggled, a sound that drifted across the water like a physical blow to my chest. I hung up before he could hear the sound of the fountain behind me. They thought I was nothing. To Mark, I was the soft wife, the kindergarten teacher who loved baking and didn't understand the high-stakes world of his private equity firm. To Sarah, I was the naive girl who shared her secrets while she took notes on how to steal my life. I should have walked away. I should have screamed. I should have marched over there and pushed them both into that expensive, heated water. But I didn't. I stood in the shadows of the hibiscus bushes and watched them for 5 more minutes. I watched how he touched the small of her back. I watched how she looked at him, not with love, but with a predatory triumph. That's when everything changed. The heat in my blood didn't turn to tears. It turned to ice, a very specific, very sharp kind of ice. Mark forgot one thing about soft people. We notice everything. We see the things you think you're hiding because you're too busy looking at yourself in the mirror. I turned my back on the pool. I walked through the lobby, past the concierge who tipped his hat to me, and got into my car. I drove home in total silence. No radio, no crying. I had a box waiting at home. It was supposed to be a surprise for our anniversary, a celebration of our first year. Now, it was going to be the beginning of his end. What they didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret of my own, a secret that started 3 months ago when I found a stray receipt in Mark's pocket, a secret that involved his business offshore accounts and the way Sarah had been managing her luxury boutique's taxes. I sat at our mahogany dining table, the one we picked out together, and I opened my laptop. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. Well, it would, soon. Before I tell you what was inside that anniversary box, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt that moment? That exact second when the person you trust most in the world turns into a stranger right before your eyes? I'm just getting started. This story goes deeper than a simple affair. This is about a year of lies and a lifetime of payback. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with a best friend who wasn't a friend at all, hit that like button and subscribe to Whispered Wrongs. You aren't alone. I sat in the dark of our living room for 3 hours before I heard his car pull into the driveway. The house felt different now. The expensive crown molding, the hand-knotted Persian rug, the scent of the lavender candles I always kept lit. It all felt like a movie set, a stage where I had played the role of the perfect, unsuspecting wife, while the lead actor was off script in another woman's arms. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there, watching the headlights sweep across the wall. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this night for months. Not because I knew about the affair, not at first, but because I've always been a girl who looks at the fine print. Mark thought I was just a kindergarten teacher with a hobby for scrapbooking. He didn't realize that my scrapbooks were actually meticulously organized ledgers of our household expenses, his erratic business trips, and the sudden, unexplained growth of Sarah's boutique. When I found that first receipt 3 months ago, a diamond tennis bracelet from a jeweler Mark never frequented, I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. Or rather, it would have, if they had the self-awareness to notice my silence wasn't peace. It was observation. The front door creaked open. Mark stepped in, humming a low tune. He smelled like expensive gin and the chlorine of the Sapphire Hotel pool. "Elena," he called out, his voice thick with a fake exhaustion that made my skin crawl. "Babe, you still up? I feel terrible about missing dinner." I reached out and clicked on the small lamp next to me. The amber glow hit his face, and for a split second, I saw the mask slip. He looked startled, guilty, before smoothing his features into that practiced, charming smile. "Hey, you're awake," he said, walking over to kiss me. I turned my head just enough so his lips hit my cheek. He didn't notice the coldness. He was too busy checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. The audit was a nightmare. I think I've looked at more numbers today than I have in my entire life. "I bet you have," I said softly. "Numbers are tricky. They always tell a story, don't they?" He paused, his hand on his tie. "Right. Anyway, I'm starving. Did you save me any of that lasagna?" "I didn't make lasagna, Mark. It's our anniversary. I thought we'd be celebrating." Right. I'm so sorry, Elena. Truly. Tomorrow. Okay? I'll take the whole day off. We'll go wherever you want." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This was the man who had promised to protect me. And there, on the collar of his white shirt, was a tiny, shimmering gold flake, a piece of the body glitter Sarah had been obsessed with lately. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They assumed that because I was kind, I was weak. They assumed that because I didn't demand to see his phone or question his late nights, I was blind. "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice as smooth as the silk he lied with, "I have something for you. A gift." I couldn't wait until tomorrow. He perked up. Mark loved gifts. He loved the feeling of being adored. "You didn't have to do that, especially after I stood you up. What is it?" "It's on the dining table. A box. Go ahead, open it." I followed him into the dining room. The box was wrapped in plain, unassuming brown paper. It looked modest, boring, exactly how he perceived me. He tore the paper away with the eagerness of a child. Underneath was a heavy black lacquer box. He lifted the lid, and for a moment, the room was silent. Inside wasn't a watch. It wasn't a set of cufflinks or a framed photo of our wedding. It was a stack of high-resolution photographs. Sarah and him at the hotel. Sarah and him at a jewelry store. Sarah and him entering an apartment building downtown. The one he told me was overflow office space for his firm. And tucked beneath the photos was a single, folded document. A printout of a bank transfer. $50,000 from his quarterly audit account moved directly into an offshore holding company registered in Sarah's name. Mark's face went from confused to pale. to a sickly shade of gray. He stood frozen. The photos slipped from his fingers, scattering across the mahogany table like autumn leaves. "Elena," he whispered. The silk in his voice was gone. Now it was just gravel. "I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like a felony, Mark," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "And it looks like a divorce." But I wasn't done. The photos and the bank statement were just the appetizers. And then I realized the truth. Giving him this box wasn't the end of my plan. It was just the opening bell. I had been the one managing the boring paperwork for our joint assets for a year. While he was busy playing house with Sarah, I had been moving pieces on a board he didn't even know existed. "You thought I was nothing," I said, stepping closer. The shadow of the chandelier made me look taller, sharper. "But while you were at the pool tonight, telling me you were at work, I was finishing the paperwork to freeze the firm's secondary accounts, the ones you used to fund Sarah's little business venture." He looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, he looked afraid. Not of losing me. He never valued me enough for that. But of losing the power he thought he had stolen. "You can't do that," he stammered. "That's company property." "No, Mark. It's marital property. And since you've been using it to commit tax fraud with your mistress, I think the authorities will be very interested in who actually owns what." I walked over to the table and picked up one of the photos. It was the one of them by the pool, the one I had taken just an hour ago from the shadows. "Happy anniversary, babe," I whispered. The look on his face was the best gift I'd ever received. The silence in the dining room was so heavy, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mark looked like he had seen a ghost. His hand reached out to touch the edge of the mahogany table, as if he needed to ground himself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving. "Elena, please," he stammered, his eyes darting between the scattered photos. "Sarah, she was going through a hard time. Her shop was failing. I was just helping a friend." The kiss? That was a moment of weakness. It meant nothing. I let out a soft, dry laugh. It sounded foreign even to my own ears. A moment of weakness? Mark, I've been watching your moments of weakness accumulate for 6 months. The weekend conferences in Aspen. The late-night meetings that always coincided with Sarah's boutique being closed. You didn't just help her. You rebuilt her entire life using the bricks from ours. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. He realized then that I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw the expensive crystal decanter at his head. I was just going to dismantle him, piece by piece, with the cold precision of an accountant. "Where are you going with this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm going exactly where you led me," I replied. To the truth, what he didn't know was that Sarah's betrayal went even deeper than the bedroom. A week ago, I had done something I wasn't proud of. I used the spare key Sarah gave me years ago, back when we promised to be each other's bridesmaids, and I went into her boutique after hours. I wasn't looking for love letters. I was looking for the paper trail, and I found it. Sarah hadn't just been taking Mark's money. She had been documenting it. She had a black book hidden in her office safe, a list of every wire transfer, every gift, and every shady business deal Mark had funneled through his firm to avoid taxes. She wasn't just his mistress, she was his insurance policy. She was keeping a record of his crimes, so that if he ever tried to leave her, she could ruin him. And then I realized the truth. They weren't just betraying me. They were poised to betray each other. They were two predators circling the same kill, unaware that a third one had been watching from the tall grass all along. I know about the ledger, Mark, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He froze. The color that had started to return to his cheeks drained away instantly. The ledger? The one Sarah keeps in her safe. The one that details how you move $3 million out of your client's trust funds to cover the losses in your private equity venture. The one that proves you've been running a Ponzi scheme on a micro scale. Mark collapsed into one of the dining chairs. He looked small, shrunken. They thought I was nothing, just the pretty wife who liked to garden. They never imagined I could understand a balance sheet, let alone find the one they had worked so hard to hide. She told you? He whispered. No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. She didn't have to. You see, Sarah thinks she's the only one with the code to that safe, but she's always been sloppy with her birthday. August 12th, 92. It was too easy. I reached into the pocket of my silk robe and pulled out a small USB drive. I held it up, letting the moonlight glint off the metal. Everything is on here, I said. The transfers, the emails, the photos of you two tonight, and most importantly, the proof that Sarah has been planning to blackmail you for the last 4 months. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They assumed I would be the victim in their twisted love story. They never considered that I would be the judge. What do you want? Mark asked, his voice hollow. Money? The house? Take it. Just don't go to the police. If this gets out, I'm done. The firm is done. Oh, Mark, I said, walking over to him and patting his cheek. I don't want the house. I want everything. I want the firm. I want Sarah's boutique. And I want you to watch as I take it all. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. You can't take the firm. You aren't a partner. Not yet, I whispered. But you're going to sign over your shares to me tonight, as an anniversary gift. In exchange, I might, just might, forget to hand this USB drive to the district attorney. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stayed to watch him break. Just then, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Sarah. I could see it on the lock screen. Is the boring wife asleep yet? Come back to the hotel. I miss you already. I pushed the phone toward him. Go ahead, Mark. Tell her you're tied up at the moment. Tell her you're busy with your wife. He didn't move. He just stared at the phone as if it were a ticking bomb. The power shift was complete. In the span of an hour, I had gone from the humiliated wife to the woman holding his entire life in the palm of my hand. But I knew Sarah wouldn't go down without a fight. She was a snake, and snakes always bite when they're cornered. Mark's hand shook as he reached for the pen I placed on the table. It was a heavy gold-plated fountain pen he'd bought to celebrate his first million. Now, it was the tool that would strip it all away. If I sign this, he muttered, his voice cracking, you promise the USB stays with you? You won't destroy me. I leaned down, my face inches from his. I could smell the lingering scent of Sarah's perfume on his skin, and for a second, a flash of pure, hot rage threatened to break my composure. But I pushed it down. I stayed quiet, and that scared him more. I promised to be as fair to you as you were to me tonight by the pool, I said. It wasn't a promise of mercy. It was a promise of justice. He signed. The ink was dark and permanent on the transfer of shares. As he finished the last loop of his signature, I pulled the papers away, blowing on them gently to let the ink dry. What they didn't know was that I wasn't working alone. The moment Mark retreated to the guest room, locked away like a prisoner in his own home, I made a phone call. It was 2 a.m. It's done, I said when the line picked up. I have his shares. He's signed over the voting rights. Excellent. A deep, yet feminine voice replied. And Sarah? She's still at the hotel. She thinks she's won. She thinks Mark is coming back to her. The woman on the other end of the line was Victoria Thorne. In our city, Victoria was a legend. She was the woman Mark had stepped over to get his position at the firm, a woman he had publicly humiliated 5 years ago by calling her too emotional for high finance. This is where they made their biggest mistake. Mark and Sarah thought I was a lonely housewife with no friends. They didn't realize that for the last 3 months, I had been meeting Victoria for tea every Tuesday. We weren't just gossiping. We were strategizing. Victoria provided the forensic accounting expertise I lacked, and in return, I was handing her the head of the man who had tried to bury her career. The board meeting is at 9 a.m., Victoria said, her tone professional, yet laced with a cold satisfaction. By 10 a.m., Mark will be escorted from the building, and by noon, we move on Sarah's boutique. I'll be there, I said. I hung up and walked to the window. The moon was setting, and the sky was turning that bruised, pre-dawn purple. I thought about Sarah. We had known each other since we were 5. We had shared clothes, secrets, and dreams. I had helped her through her father's funeral. I had loaned her the money for her first inventory when no bank would touch her, and she had repaid me by trying to dismantle my life. That's when everything changed. I realized that I didn't just want her money or her shop. I wanted her to feel the exact moment the floor dropped out from under her, just like I had felt by that pool. I went to my closet and pulled out a stunning, sharp-shouldered black suit. It was a power suit I'd bought months ago, but never had the confidence to wear, according to Mark. I laid it out on the bed. I didn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night going through Sarah's social media. She had just posted a picture of a champagne glass by the pool. The caption read, "Finally getting everything I deserve. #new beginnings, #blessed. I smiled. She was right. She was about to get exactly what she deserved. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized that the best friend she had been mocking was now her landlord. As the sun began to rise, I heard Mark stirring in the guest room. He came out looking like a man on his way to the gallows. He had tried to wash the chlorine and guilt off, but he just looked gray and hollowed out. "Elena, please," he said, seeing me in my suit. "Let's talk about this. We can go to counseling. I'll fire Sarah. I'll make it right." "You can't fire her, Mark," I said, checking my reflection and applying a bold, red lipstick. "Because as of 8 hours ago, you don't work there anymore. And as for making it right, you're about 400 days too late." I grabbed my bag and the anniversary box, now filled with the signed legal documents. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm going to go see our sister, Mark. I think she's waiting for a call that's never going to come." The morning sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows of Serafina's, Sarah's boutique. It was located in the most expensive district in the city, a place where the air smelled like imported leather and desperate ambition. Mark had paid for the lease, the marble floors, and even the gold leaf signage. I pulled my car up to the curb and sat there for a moment, watching through the window. Sarah was inside. She was holding a steaming latte, laughing at something on her phone. She looked radiant, refreshed, and completely untouchable. What she didn't know was that her world had already ended. It just hadn't reached her yet. I stepped out of the car. My heels clicked against the pavement with a rhythmic, lethal precision. I felt like a different woman than the one who had stood trembling behind a hibiscus bush Only 12 hours ago, the soft Elena was gone. In her place was someone who had finally learned the true value of her own silence. I pushed the heavy glass door open. A bell chimed, a sweet, delicate sound that used to make me feel welcome. Now, it sounded like a warning. "Elena," Sarah gasped, her smile widening, though it didn't reach her eyes. She tucked a lock of blonde hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I'd seen her do 1,000 times. "What are you doing here so early? I thought you and Mark were doing a big anniversary brunch today." "Plans changed," I said, walking toward a rack of silk blouses. I touched the fabric. It was thin, cheap, just like her loyalty. Mark had some unexpected business to take care of. Sarah's expression shifted, just a flicker of panic crossing her face before she masked it with a concerned pout. "Oh no! On your first anniversary? That man is such a workaholic. I keep telling him he needs to prioritize you more." This is where she made her biggest mistake. She thought she could still play both sides. She thought she could stand in the ruins of my marriage and offer me a shoulder to cry on while still tasting my husband on her lips. "He is prioritizing me now, Sarah," I said, turning to look at her. "In fact, he spent the entire night making sure I was taken care of. He signed some very important papers." Sarah's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "Papers? What kind of papers?" "The kind that transfer ownership," I replied. I walked over to her counter and placed the black lacquer box on the glass top. "I brought you a gift, too. Since we're like sisters, I didn't want you to feel left out of the anniversary celebrations." I opened the lid. The photos of them by the pool were right on top. The color drained from Sarah's face, so fast, it was almost poetic. She dropped her latte. The paper cup hit the marble floor, splashing brown liquid across her expensive suede boots. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at the photo of Mark's hand on her back. "Elena, I can explain," she whispered. It was the exact same script Mark had used. They really were made for each other. "Don't," I said. "The explanation is boring. I'm much more interested in the why. Why my husband? Why my life? Was the boutique I funded not enough for you? Did you need the man who paid for it too?" Sarah's shock began to curdle into something else. The sweet best friend mask shattered, revealing the jagged edges of the woman underneath. She straightened her back and narrowed her eyes. "You want to know why?" she spat, her voice no longer a whisper. "Because you don't deserve any of this. You're a mouse, Elena. You sit in that big house and bake cookies while men like Mark run the world. He was bored. He's been bored since the honeymoon. I gave him excitement. I gave him a partner who actually understands what it takes to stay on top. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I leaned in close until I could see the sweat beads forming on her upper lip. You didn't give him a partner, Sarah. You gave him a parasite. And unfortunately for you, the host has just been replaced." I pulled a legal document from the box and slid it across the counter, right into the puddle of her spilled coffee. "This is a notice of immediate eviction," I said. "Mark transferred the commercial lease of this building to me last night. As of 5 minutes ago, I am your landlord. And I've decided that Serafina's doesn't fit the aesthetic of my new portfolio." "You can't do that!" she shrieked. "I have a contract." "Check the morality clause, Sarah, the one that says the lease is void if the tenant engages in criminal activity on the premises. Like, say, using the boutique's back office to facilitate money laundering for a private equity firm." Sarah stumbled back, her hip hitting the shelving unit. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Victoria Thorne does," I said, "and she's currently at the firm with the police and the SEC. They'll be here in about 20 minutes to seize your records." But then, Sarah did something I didn't expect. She laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound that echoed through the empty store. And then I realized the truth. You think you're so smart, Elena? You think you found everything in that safe? Sarah sneered, reaching under the counter. She pulled out a small, old-fashioned key. You found the money Mark stole from his clients. But you didn't find the money he stole from you. She pointed toward the back of the boutique, toward the basement door. Go ahead. Go downstairs. Take a look at the crates in the corner. Then, tell me if you still want to be the one holding all the shares. A cold chill washed over me. What was in the basement? And why did Sarah look like she had just won the game? The basement door was heavy, painted a deceptive, innocent white that matched the rest of the boutique. But as the latch clicked open, the air that rushed up to meet me felt different. It was stale, metallic, and carried the scent of old paper and damp concrete. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her arms crossed, a jagged, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Go on, Elena. You've always been so fond of the truth. Go see what your loving husband really thought of your future. That's when everything changed. My confidence, which had felt like a suit of armor only moments ago, began to feel like glass. I descended the stairs, the sound of my own breathing echoing against the narrow walls. In the far corner of the basement, tucked behind racks of out-of-season clothes, sat 3 large wooden crates. They weren't addressed to the boutique. They were addressed to an estate in the Caymans, a name I recognized from Mark's private journals. I grabbed a crowbar, leaning against the wall, and pried the lid off the first crate. I expected gold. I expected cash. I expected more evidence of the Ponzi scheme. What I didn't know was the betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was ancestral. Inside the crates weren't bars of bullion. They were paintings, sculptures, hand-carved jewelry boxes. These were my family's heirlooms, pieces from my grandmother's estate that Mark had told me were lost in a warehouse fire 3 years ago. The insurance company had paid out, and I had mourned the loss of my only connection to my mother's side of the family. But they weren't gone. He had kept them. He had faked the fire, pocketed the insurance money, and was now preparing to ship my history off to a private buyer to fund his and Sarah's new beginning. And then I realized the truth. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to take my past, my present, and my future, leaving me with nothing but a house full of memories he had already set on fire. I stood over the crate, my hand trembling, as I touched the cold silver of my grandmother's tea set. This wasn't just greed. This was a systematic dismantling of my identity. He told me you'd never look. Sarah's voice floated down from the stairs. He said, you were too busy looking at the clouds to ever notice what was under your feet. He promised me that once these were sold, we'd have enough to start the firm in Europe. You were just the bank, Elena. A slow, steady, unsuspecting bank. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They thought the discovery of these items would break me. They thought I would collapse in grief over the items I had already mourned once. But as I looked at my grandmother's silver, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, to crystalline clarity. The insurance payout for these items had been over $2 million. If Mark had faked that fire, he hadn't just committed tax fraud or money laundering. He had committed insurance fraud on a federal level. I pulled my phone out. I didn't call Victoria. I didn't call the police. I called the one person Mark feared more than the law, the lead investigator for the insurance firm that had paid out that claim, a man who had spent 3 years trying to prove Mark was a liar. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dropping into that intimate, whispered tone. I think I found what you've been looking for, and I think you'll find the owner of the building is very eager to cooperate. I looked up the stairs at Sarah. Her smirk was gone. She realized, a second too late, that by showing me this, she hadn't gained leverage. She had handed me the final nail for both of their coffins. You should have kept the basement locked, Sarah, I whispered. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. I walked past her, not saying another word, leaving her alone in the dark with the stolen ghosts of my family. When I pulled back into the driveway of our home, the sun was high in the sky, mocking the cold stillness in my heart. The house looked exactly the same. The manicured lawn, the white shutters, the wreath on the door. It was a monument to a life that had never actually existed. I found Mark in the kitchen. He was nursing a cup of coffee, staring blankly at the wall. He had changed into a casual sweater, trying to look like the reasonable husband again. He thought we were in the middle of a negotiation. He thought he still had cards to play because he believed I still loved him. They thought I was nothing. They thought my heart was a weakness he could always exploit. Elena, he said, standing up quickly, I've been thinking. The shares. I'll give you a seat on the board and we can keep the house. We can tell everyone we're just restructuring. We can survive this. I didn't answer. I walked past him and began opening the kitchen drawers, pulling out a set of heavy-duty packing tape and a black marker. Elena, did you hear me? I heard you, Mark, I said, my voice eerily calm. But I wasn't at the boutique to talk to Sarah about restructuring. I was in the basement. The coffee cup in his hand didn't shatter. He set it down with a click that was far too loud in the empty room. His eyes searched mine, looking for a trace of the woman who used to believe his every word. The basement, he whispered. My grandmother's tea set is beautiful, isn't it? I asked, finally looking him in the eye. And the lost Van Gogh sketch? It looks much better in person than it did in the insurance photos you submitted 3 years ago. That's when everything changed. The last shred of his charming husband persona evaporated. His face hardened into something ugly and desperate. You don't understand the pressure I was under, he hissed, stepping toward me. The firm was hemorrhaging. I did it for us. I did it so you could keep living this life. You liked the vacations, didn't you? You liked the jewelry. I liked the truth, Mark, but you were too cheap to give it to me. I stayed quiet, and that scared him more. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just started taping up a cardboard box. What are you doing? He demanded. I'm packing your things, Mark, because the police are currently at Sarah's boutique, and the insurance investigators are about 5 minutes behind them. I told them you'd be here, ready to confess to the arson and the fraud, to save yourself from the RICO charges Victoria is bringing against the firm. He lunged for my phone, but I didn't move. I didn't have to. Go ahead, I said. Check your email. He grabbed his laptop from the counter, his fingers flying across the keys. His face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. What he didn't know was that I had sent a BCC of every single document from Sarah's ledger to the entire board of directors, the SEC, and the local news desk an hour ago. You destroyed me, he breathed, the laptop screen reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. You destroyed everything? No, Mark. I just stopped pretending the fire was an accident. Just then, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway filled the room. Not one car, several. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. 2 black SUVs were parked out front, and a man in a sharp gray suit stepped out. Mr. Vance. Behind him, two uniformed officers were already walking toward the porch. This is where they made their biggest mistake. They thought I was the one who needed protection. They didn't realize I was the one holding the keys to the cage. Mark tried to run toward the back door, but I stood in his way. I didn't have to be strong. I just had to be there. He stopped, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. "I never knew you," he whispered. "You never bothered to look," I replied. As the officers entered the house and placed their hands on his shoulders, I felt a strange sense of peace. The humiliation of the pool, the lies of the work audit, the betrayal of my best friend, it was all being washed away by the cold reality of the law. But I had one last stop to make, because while Mark was going to a cell, Sarah was still holding on to the one thing I wanted back more than anything else. The lobby of the police station was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my black suit still crisp, my red lipstick still perfect. Across the room, behind a reinforced glass window, sat Sarah. She wasn't radiant anymore. Her body glitter had rubbed off, leaving her skin looking dull and sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her hair was a mess, and the sister, who thought she was a queen, was now just another woman waiting for a phone call that would never come. Mark wouldn't be calling. He was busy in an interrogation room 3 hallways away, already trying to pin the insurance fraud on her. They thought I was nothing, but as I walked toward the glass, the officers gave me a respectful nod. They knew who had handed them the case of the decade on a silver platter. I picked up the phone. Sarah did the same, her hand shaking. "You look tired, Sarah," I said, my voice a soft, intimate whisper that echoed in her ear. "You think you won," she hissed, her voice cracking. "Mark will get out. He has the best lawyers, and I'll find a way. I always do." What they didn't know was I had already anticipated her lawyers. I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass. "Mark isn't using his lawyers for you, Sarah. He's currently signing a statement that says the basement storage was entirely your idea. He's telling them you coerced him using the ledger as blackmail. He's throwing you to the wolves to shave 5 years off his sentence." Sarah's eyes widened. The betrayal she had practiced so flawlessly on me was now being turned against her by the man she thought she had stolen. "He wouldn't," she gasped. "He would, and he did, because at the end of the day, Mark only loves one thing, himself. You were just a luxury he couldn't afford." And then I realized the truth. Looking at her didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. I didn't feel joy in her misery. I felt something better, closure. The power shift was so absolute that she no longer even felt like an enemy. She felt like a ghost. "The boutique is being liquidated," I continued. "I've already arranged for my family's heirlooms to be moved back to my house. The insurance money has been returned, and the rewards for the recovery of the art have been donated to the school where I teach. I'm starting a scholarship for girls who feel like they don't have a voice." This is where they made their biggest mistake. They thought that by taking my things, they could take my spirit. They didn't realize that my spirit is what allowed me to wait, to watch, and to win. I stood up, hanging the phone back on the hook. Sarah was screaming something behind the glass, her fists pounding against the surface, but I couldn't hear her. I had already tuned her out. I walked out of the station and into the crisp afternoon air. For the first time in a year, I breathed deeply. No more lies. No more audits. No more whispers behind my back. I stayed quiet, and that scared them more. But now, my silence wasn't a weapon. It was peace. I went back to the house, my house, I walked out to the backyard, past the kitchen where Mark had stood frozen, and stood by the small garden I had tended so carefully. I realized that, like these flowers, I had been pruned. It was painful, and it was ugly for a moment, but it was necessary for the growth that was coming. Mark and Sarah are gone. The whispered wrongs of my marriage have been shouted from the rooftops. I am no longer the woman standing 40 feet away, watching my life fall apart. I am the woman standing right in the center of it, holding the matches and the map. They thought I was a mouse. They forgot that even a mouse can find the hole in the foundation and bring the whole house down. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet gift in a black box. Sometimes it's just the truth, finally told. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that every soft person has a hidden strength, hit that subscribe button. It helps me keep sharing these stories of whispered wrongs made right. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Subscribe to hear another story of a betrayal that went too far. Until next time, keep listening.